everyone. I welcome you to the CEC lecture series. I'm Nupur Chawla, teaching English literature at Maitri College, Delhi University. And today we are going to talk about a text by an African American woman, Shirley Chisholm, and the text is titled Women and the Liberation, which was written in 1970. So in this discussion, we take on from where we had left off in the previous lecture, where we were discussing about the idea of prejudice that she discusses, which was faced by the African Americans and women in the 70s of America. She talks about the prejudice in the professional sphere. She also talks about how this prejudice was somewhat invisible and there was a refusal to accept it. But then women like her brought attention to these realities in the American context by means of their writings. Now, the next, a very important idea that she mentions in her essay is that how women then are sometimes complicit in the subjugation of their own selves, or on other occasions, should they be taking charge, right? So this, question of the fact that whether they were complicit in the subjugation of themselves or were they taking charge, this is something that Shirley Chisholm engages with in the next segment of the essay. So she says that women had initially submitted to oppression, but she says that women are becoming aware, as blacks did, that they can have equal treatment if they will fight for it, and they are starting to organize. So she's stating that how initially there was a kind of a submission to these unequal conditions. But now she says that, one also notices another trend whereby, just like the African Americans, women are also, organizing themselves. They are realizing the importance of raising a voice for the sake of, or for getting an equal treatment in society, right? Now, but she says that, of course, this kind of a move was not without its challenges. So now, what were the challenges to this kind of a liberation of women? She talks about that next. And she says that the difficulty lies for women, those who are socially conditioned not to rebel from infancy, right? And she says, and I quote, that from the time they are first wrapped in pink blankets, the color of their caste, unquote. So she says that one of the foremost problems confronting women as they organize themselves to take up the question of equality is the idea of social conditioning. That how, right from the childhood, women were conditioned, women were taught not to rebel, not to raise their voice, and to accept whatever is given to them. And this was all, couched, as we all know, under this entire discourse of femininity, that how it is unfeminine to raise your voice, it is unfeminine to be angry, it is unfeminine to be aggressive, it is unfeminine to question. But she says that this kind of a social conditioning then was one of the first challenges that women would confront as they started to organize themselves. And she also refers to this fact that how they would be wrapped in pink blankets right from the childhood, which almost became the color of their caste. Again, now caste over here doesn't mean what it means in the Indian context, but she's trying to say that how there were these very fixed notions of womanhood or femininity that then started to limit women's freedom as well. Now, the other challenge was that how women had been programmed to be dependent upon men. They seldom had economic freedom enough to let them be free in more significant ways. Now, you see, if women were to organize themselves, they were supposed to have some kind of an independence while they were out working, etc. Yet they had been programmed, or they had been conditioned to be dependent upon men. So it's seldom that they had economic freedom. Such a freedom that would make them feel liberated in more significant ways. So even as women were seen at workplaces, yet it was a very small percentage, right? And how this kind of a conditioning of thought or this conditioning that they went through, that how they are dependent upon men, that how a man is supposed to provide for them, this kind of a thought process then was another challenge that came in the way of women organizing themselves, right? And we see that she further points to this kind of a dependence or this kind of a somewhat partial economic freedom when she says, and I quote, she says that ordinary working women are subjected to discrimination by being confined to the duller and the less well-paid jobs, or by being paid less than men for doing the same work. Now, this is something that she was also discussing initially, but it becomes still pertinent to look at this, that how while women were working, yet what was it that was still lacking in their economic independence? What was it that was still making them dependent on men? Because they were not being paid well, they were not being paid at par, and in fact they were confined to just a few jobs that would also not be high paying. Like she says before, that they would not be allowed to occupy managerial positions, right? So these are some of the challenges that she said were ahead of women. And yet despite them, we see Shirley Chisholm almost give out a call for women to organize and rise up against subjection. And she says, against them is arrayed the weight of centuries of tradition, from St. Paul's "let women learn in silence" down to the American adage "a woman's place is in the home," unquote. So what she says is that it was not meant to be an easy battle, because women then were kind of up against the weight, as she says, of centuries of tradition. Now, what was this tradition? This tradition was which viewed women as essentially inferior, like and this was prescribed not just, or this was evident not just in society but even in scriptures as well. How Saint Paul, she quotes Saint Paul, who said that let women learn in silence. So what does it mean? That how women then were supposed to be silent. They were supposed to not raise their voice. And also there was this American adage, as she calls it, that a woman's place is in the home. So she said that these were the attitudes that women had to overcome in order to, in their fight for equality. Now, she goes on to say, and I quote, that women too must rebel. They should start in school by rejecting the traditional education society considers suitable to them, and which amounts to educational, social and economic slavery, unquote. Now, after talking about the challenges, she very clearly also seems to be drawing some kind of a roadmap, where she says that women must rebel. She spells it out in no uncertain terms, and she in fact kind of tells where to start. She says that you should start in school. How? By rejecting the traditional education that society feels is suitable for women, right? And she says that now, what is this traditional education that was considered suitable for women? That was, learning knitting, learning these other, so to say, skill-based tasks, but not really an education that would, kind of liberate them intellectually, right? So she said that we need to start at school by questioning this kind of an education, and she says that this amounts to social and economic slavery. How? Because then women would be confined to certain roles right from the beginning. Because if they're educated in just a certain few skills, then that is what they are prepared to take up jobs in eventually, right? So she said that we need to hit at the root of this bias. Next, she also points out that how law, if we talk about the legal aspect, is a lot of times inefficacious. And she says that some kind of a direct action is needed. And I quote, she says that the law cannot do the major part of the job of winning equality for women. Women must do it themselves. They must become revolutionaries, unquote. Now we notice very, very powerful assertion over here. She says that yes. Now remember, we were talking at the in the beginning of the previous lecture that she talked about the Equal Rights Amendment, which talked about legal equality. So she said that yes, law is important, but again, law cannot do the major part of the job. While legal sanctions are there, but according to Shirley Chisholm, the job of winning equality actually lies in the hands of women. That women must do it themselves. They must become revolutionaries. So which means what? That they themselves need to take up this task of overturning the order which calls for their subjection. And one of the ways that she prescribes is that they need to own the truth of their womanhood. Now, how can they become revolutionaries? By owning the truth of their femininity. She says that women should start to replace their negative ideas of their femininity with positive ones, affirming their nature more and more strongly. So again, what does it mean? She says that all those negative ideas pertaining to femininity, that they are supposed to be, that they are weak, that they are insufficient, women also needed to own the truth of their womanhood. They needed to replace such negative ideas with positive affirmations, and that too to be done much more strongly, right? Now she says, and I quote, the warmth, gentleness and compassion that are part of the female stereotype are positive human values, values that are becoming more and more important as the values of our world begin to shatter and fall from our grasp, unquote. Now, while she says that, women becoming aware and participating in their own liberation, they need to come out of the negative, thoughts that they have about their own womanhood. But at the same time, Shirley Chisholm is also reminding women that these, so to say, ideas which are often associated with women, that is, the idea of gentleness, the idea of compassion, that how a woman is supposed to be warm, not supposed to be, but is considered to be warm, is supposed to be, or is considered to be gentle and compassionate. She says that these are your strengths, right? These might be the stereotypes, but at the same time, we need to have an alternate view of them, that these are the strengths of being a human. These are positive human values, and one needs to have that kind of an attitude towards this perspective, and how the world then requires these human values still more. So she's almost making women aware of the power that already lies within them, right? Now she further goes on to talk at length about the values of femaleness, as she calls it, right? And she seems to be charting a roadmap for liberation. And she says, and I quote, "If we reject our restricted roles, we do not have to reject these values of femaleness. They are enduring values. We must become revolutionaries in the style of Gandhi and King. Then, working towards our own freedom, we can help the others work free from the traps of their stereotypes." Unquote. Now you see, it's of course a very loaded statement, but there are 2-3 important points that she is making here. A, she says that when we reject our restricted roles, we do not have to reject the values of femaleness. These are enduring values which need to be preserved and which need to be part of our society. And then she says that we must become revolutionaries. Once we accept these values, we must at the same time then become revolutionaries in the style of Gandhi and King. Now let's notice that being an African American woman, she is very well aware of Mahatma Gandhi's style of revolution, and King over here refers to Martin Luther King, right? So she says that we need to work towards our own freedom, and that's how we can also help others to work free from the traps of their stereotypes. Now you see, remember I told you that how her argument then becomes or acquires other dimensions. So she is not just talking about women or African American women. Now her argument then also further branches out, where she talks about that how once women then become aware and they liberate themselves from the stereotypes, they can also help the other sections of society to work free from the traps of the stereotypes, right? So what we notice is that she has a very inclusive idea of liberation then, freeing the other social sections as well. She urges women to organize and work for freedom, making them aware and instilling a desire for decisive action, right? Now, further developing upon this point, we see that how she also seems to adopt a kind of a humanist stance on discrimination. So let's look at this quote that she mentions in the essay. She says, "I am not anti-male any more than I am anti-white. And I am not anti-white because I understand that white people, like black ones, are victims of a racist society. They are products of their time and place. It's the same with men," unquote. So what she is highlighting then is that she is not, in advocating for women's equality, she's not being anti-male. And she says that, and neither am I anti-white. She says that I understand that even the white people, like the black ones, men, are victims of a racist society. So you see such a deeply humanist stance she acquires. She sees even the victimizer himself is a victim somewhere. So it's not that essentially people are bad. It's not that essentially, they would want to subjugate the others, but they themselves are victims of this discourse of prejudice, discrimination that is so prevalent that is so prevalent in society. And she says that they are the product of their time and place. So it's the context or it's the society that needs to be cleansed, that needs to be held accountable instead of the individuals. So you see, she's making a very evolved argument here then that how feminism then cannot be equated to man-hating in that sense. Instead, she shows that kind of a understanding, sympathetic understanding of even those that are, who are, so to say, the ones who are practicing this kind of a prejudice, that they themselves are not to be blamed, right? So, having made these points, she finally says that she kind of gives us a vision for change ahead and women's active participation in it. And she quotes, she says, and I quote, "American women are beginning to respond to our oppression. While most of us are not yet revolutionaries, the time is coming when we will be," unquote. So throughout the essay, she goes over the conditions that are working against the interests of women. Then she goes on to talk about the need for women to organize themselves and take up the cause of their liberation. She talks about the challenges that are ahead of women once they start up on this task. And then she says that while this new trend of change has been activated, she says most of us are not revolutionaries yet, but the time is coming when we will be. So she is almost like laying a seed of of this kind of a change where women begin to respond to their oppression and understand the need for establishing the equal rights. And at the same time, what we also need to notice is that while she is urging the women to take up this kind of a strong stance, she also does not reject men. She does not reject the white American men either. And she says that I understand that they are as much victims of a racist society, right? So Shirley Chisholm's argument then is incredibly comprehensive. It is incredibly, complex. Complex, why? Because her argument does not then just remain restricted to the cause of the women alone. She also takes a point further, where she says that while women actively participate in their own liberation, where they are liberating themselves from the stereotypes, then by this measure, they will also set a precedent for the others, for the other sections as well, to take inspiration and work towards conditions that are for the benefit of the individual in that sense, right? So while she does come across as a woman who is full of vision, she comes across as a woman who is politically aware. At the same time, what is particularly noticeable in her text is this almost direct call to action, right? She does not mince words. She very directly faces the reality head on, lays it bare in the most simple terms for people to understand, for women to know about their own predicament, for women to recognize what is wrong. And once that recognition comes in place, she says that the next step is to organize and to bring about a change. So even as she points out that there is a section of society, or there is a section of women who are already starting to join this move towards liberation, towards freedom, but she says that it's also still more important that this urge for liberation, or this desire for change, needs to be kept alive. And she has hope. She says that the time is coming when all the women will have this kind of a consciousness, right? So we see that not only does she have this kind of an energy to instill women with this kind of a need for action, at the same time she has her eye on the future too. She is incredibly hopeful. So it's not just the present and the past that she engages with as a women's rights activist, or as a politician, or as a writer, or as a thinker, but she also has an eye on the future. She, on the basis of her observation of the present, she says that the time is coming when all the women will organize and work together to topple these conditions that limit them right now in this kind of a subjugated role. So you see, this is just one chapter from the book that we had discussed. Now the other parts of the book talk about other dimensions of being a woman, or what it meant to be a woman in the 70s, right? So you might also go through those sections and in that sense get an entire view of what it meant to be an African American woman in the 1970s of America. Thank you.